Okay guys, so welcome to Module 2 of the Ielts grammar course, and today we're going to get into simple and complex sentences. This is an area that a lot of you are very worried about, and it's not because simple sentences or complex sentences are actually complex. It's a lot to do with a lot of misinformation out there and not really understanding what these things are, and B, not understanding how to make complex sentences and how it's not very complex at all. So the goal of this module is, by the end of this module, and when you do the practice activities and all of those different things, that you will have a very clear picture about what you need to do and how to do it. Okay, so what will we do in this lesson? What is a simple sentence? What is a complex sentence? What do examiners want? Very important. And the dangers of complex sentences, so how you can mess them up and how they can lower your scores and how to avoid that. And most importantly, how to make complex sentences. So what is a simple sentence? So even if you are pretty sure about what you know about this, please don't skip ahead. There's a lot of little things that whenever they sink in and whenever you understand them, it makes the whole topic just much easier to understand. So please do watch this, even if you think it's very basic. So a simple sentence is a sentence with one clause only. You can make a simple sentence by including a subject plus a verb plus an object or a completed thought. So very simply, I teach English. I, subject is me, teach is the verb, and English is the object or completed thought. So one clause only, and keeping it very simple. So what is a complex sentence? So a complex sentence has more than one clause. So it has two clauses, or it has more than two clauses. You'll find online that there's a little bit of debate about if it's a two clauses, that means that it's a compound sentence rather than a complex sentence. Number one, try and avoid as much terminology and as much of debates online about different things as possible, because it just leads to confusion. And number two, we are not going to get into the differences between, simple, compound, and complex sentences, because for the purposes of the Ielts test, what the examiners will be looking for is complex sentence, two or more clauses. So that's what we're going to use for the purposes of this. So one clause is a main or an independent clause. So as mentioned already, one of the most confusing things about grammar and confusing things about this area is just the terminology, just what they call things. So if it's just one clause, it is going to be called the main clause or independent clause. When I say main clause, or if you see main clause, or if you see independent clause, that means it's the same thing. Alright, so main clause, independent clause, they're the same thing, just different names. And a good way to think about main clauses is they express a complete thought if you take away the other clause. So the main clause, if you deleted the other clause, or if you covered it up, that main clause would make sense. It would express a complete thought. The other clause or clauses are subordinate or dependent. So you have the main clause and then you have the subordinate clause. Or you have an independent clause and then you have a dependent clause. It's called the independent clause because it can act independently. It doesn't need anything else to make sense. It's called the dependent clause because it depends on the other clause for meaning. If you take it away, it doesn't make any sense. Let's look at an example. So I am a teacher. So I am a teacher is the main independent clause. If I just said to you, I am a teacher, if you'd never met me before and I just said to you, I am a teacher, that would make total sense to you. You would understand exactly what I said to you. If I said to you, I'd never met you before, and I walked up to you and all I said was, who specializes in teaching Ielts? You'd be like, what? So let's think about this and let's just reiterate this and show it to you in a little bit more detail. So if I just said to you, I am a teacher, so I deleted who specializes in teaching Ielts, I only used the main or independent clause, that would make sense to you. It expresses a complete thought that actually makes sense. But if I deleted I am a teacher and I just walked up to you and I said, hello, who specializes in teaching IELTS? It doesn't make any sense. It's not a complete thought. It is dependent on the independent clause or the main clause in order to make sense. So hopefully that removes doubt about like what is a main clause, what is a dependent clause, what is an independent clause, what is a subordinate clause. So subordinate dependent mean exactly the same thing. Main independent mean exactly the same thing. Main clause expresses a whole thought. Other clauses, the subordinate dependent, they don't express a whole thought and they depend on the other clause. So hopefully that makes sense to you. So why are complex sentences so complex? Most students see the word complex and think it means a long sentence, a complicated sentence, a sophisticated sentence, an academic sentence, a high-level sentence. So this really comes from these very poor IELTS teachers that just take a look at the official marking criteria, look at the word complex, and don't really think about what it actually means. If you look at the sentence, I am a teacher who specializes in teaching IELTS, it's none of those things. It's not a long sentence. It's not a complicated sentence. It's not a sophisticated or academic sentence. And I don't even know what high level means, but a lot of students talk about high level sentences. But I am a teacher who specializes in teaching IELTS is a complex sentence. Why is it a complex sentence? Because it has an independent clause and a dependent clause. It has more than one clause, and that's what a complex sentence is. So please, if you only understand one thing from this whole lesson, complex does not mean complex. Complex just means more than one clause. It's the silly English language, things meaning one thing and then being something else. I know it's a silly language sometimes, but complex does not mean complex, especially for the purposes of IELTS writing. So what do examiners want? So they don't want high level, they don't want complicated, they don't want sophisticated. What do they want? So let's look at what the actual official marking criteria says. So Band 5 attempts complex sentences, but these tend to be less accurate than simple sentences. So even a Band 5 answer they've made an attempt at complex sentences, but it's very clear that when they try to go from simple to more complex, multiple clauses, they're making some mistakes. Now, most of you don't have to worry about Band 5 in grammar, but you need to be aware of what some of the things that they will be looking at. Band 6 uses a mix of simple and complex sentence forms. Now, you'll notice that's all they say about simple and complex sentences for Band 6. You just use them, alright? So what they're actually saying is, you have attempted to use them, but in order to get a 7 or above, you have to produce frequent error-free sentences. So 7 or above in terms of complexity, in terms of complex sentence, means that you use complex sentences, and it also means that you can write complex sentences accurately. Alright, so Band 7, 8, or 9, they use complex sentences and they can write complex sentences accurately. Not all accurately, so you'll notice here it produces frequent error-free sentences. It does not say every single sentence that is complex is 100% accurate. It doesn't say that. It doesn't require that. If it required that, nobody would get a 7 or above, or very, 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 very few people. If you want a 7 or above, you should attempt to use complex sentences, and you should demonstrate that you can do so successfully. It does not mean that every single sentence needs to be complex. It does not mean that every single sentence needs to be complex. Now, if you are at a Band 7 or above, just naturally, the way that you write, most of your sentences will have multiple clauses in them, will have more than one clause. Now, does that mean that if you write one sentence that is very simple and only has one clause, you'll automatically get below a 7? No, some sentences, for example, topic sentences sometimes, will just have one clause, but it is rare for a 7 or above to have lots of sentences that have just one clause in them. And we'll look at just how simple it is to make complex sentences in further on in this lesson. But thinking about what the examiners want, they want most of your sentences to be complex and most of those to be error-free. So that's the kind of the standard that you need to get to, and it's not a very, very high standard. What do examiners really want? They want to be able to understand what you mean, and they want you to clearly convey what you mean. So they're not interested in complexity. What they're interested in is, you would not believe how nice it is when you're marking someone's essay and you can just look at it one time and understand everything in it. That is your goal. Your goal is not to increase complexity. Your goal is to increase clarity. Complex sentences are simply a tool that allow you to convey complex ideas. And I put those complex ideas in quotation marks because complex ideas are not, again, this is silly, I know it's confusing, they're not that complex, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail. Complex sentences enable you to take complex ideas and convey them clearly. So conveying complex ideas. What are complex ideas? So first class air travel is luxurious. That's a simple idea. First class air travel results in the person being well rested. That's a simple idea. First class air travel is very expensive. That's a simple idea. I don't fly first class. Obviously, I'm not rich enough to fly first class. But those are 4 simple ideas. But if we were to combine these, like say we were writing an essay paragraph about what are the advantages and disadvantages, or what is first class better than normal class, or do you fly first class, you would have to combine these 4 simple ideas into a complex idea. And a complex idea, for the purposes of this, is just really multiple ideas. Okay, multiple ideas working together. So not complex as in Einstein level, like PhD level theory. It's just multiple single ideas together, acting together. So I can put this together in a sentence. Although first class air travel is luxurious and results in a person being well rested, it is very expensive. And this is why I do not fly first class. So what I've done here, this is a complex sentence. So I've used a complex sentence in order to convey clearly 4 simple ideas. If we combine these 4 simple ideas together, we come up with complex ideas. So the reason why they're complex is there are more than one of them. And I've combined it and used it in a complex sentence to convey my complex ideas. Because if I didn't do that, then I would just have to write this sentence, then write this sentence, then write this sentence, then write this sentence. Now, that would be 100% accurate. The person reading it would understand what I mean, but it's a bit clunky. It doesn't really flow to the extent that this one sentence does. So it's more about style and style of delivery than anything else. So hopefully that makes sense about what is a complex idea and how we use complex sentences to convey those ideas. I think that's really, really important to break it down to the most basic level so that you guys understand what you're doing. Because if you don't understand what you're doing, it's very difficult to do it. So the danger of complex sentences. There are 2 very important dangers that you need to think about. Going for the complex means that you ignore the simple. So think about it this way. Think about Michael Jordan playing basketball, or Michelangelo painting, or Picasso painting, or Beethoven playing music. They were geniuses. They were the absolute best at what they did. But what set them apart from everybody else was that they did the basics, they did the fundamentals way better than everybody else. Picasso, if you look at Picasso paintings, they are incredibly I'm not an art guy, but they're not normal. They are, I can't think of the word, avant-garde maybe to describe them. They were very, very cutting edge, but I did a bit of research about Picasso. I read a book about him, and it said that before he went into the very, very complex and the very new, he mastered the basics of painting, and he was unbelievable at all of those basic techniques. In order to do well in the Ielts test, you need to get good at these very, very basic, at the very basic level. And we're going to look at that in a bit more detail in a minute. Understand that complex does not mean complex. We've looked at that already. We don't need to really go into that any much more, but those are the two pitfalls, the two dangers that you might come across. So going for the complex means that you ignore the simple. So let's get into this a bit more. It is essential that you get the basics, the fundamentals correct before you worry about complex sentences. You could write 3 or 4 very sophisticated sentences, but if you then make simple mistakes in other sentences, you are showing that your grammar is not very advanced. So you could get lucky with one sentence, but if you're making basic mistakes in all the other sentences, the examiner is not going to look at your writing and say, well, here's one band 9 sentence, let's give them a band 9. No, they're going to look at all of the other sentences and say, okay, she made or he made some very basic mistakes in all of these other sentences. It's probably a band 5 or a band 6. For example, getting simple things like articles, tenses, or verb-subject agreement correct are just as important as the more complex stuff. So it is important that we're producing complex sentences, but it's even more important that you're getting the basics right, that you're getting your articles right, that you're getting your tenses right, that you're getting your verb-subject agreement right. So I'm going to show you in this lesson how easy it is to make a complex sentence, but please do not think that if you make lots of complex sentences, you're going to get a high score. It is just a part of getting a high score. Even more important than that is accuracy and getting the basics correct. And obviously in this course we're going to be looking at how to get your articles correct, how to get your tenses correct, how to get your verb-subject agreement correct, all of those things. So you do not get high marks for writing very long sentences. So it's not about length. You do not get high marks for writing sentences with lots of clauses. It's not like, a 9-clause sentence gets more marks than a 2-clause sentence. It's not really what they're looking for. What they're looking for is just that you've demonstrated the ability to write complex sentences. You get high marks for writing clear sentences without any errors. And complex sentences are important, but remember what they actually are. So sorry for maybe a bit of repetition here, but I really want to hammer this home, because when I have discussed this with students in the past, when I've just touched on it, they haven't really got it. And they come back and they're making the same mistakes. So sorry if I'm repeating myself and I'm really hammering home this point, but I really want to hammer it home so that you can, get the scores that you need and never have to worry about this stuff again. That's my dream is that you will never hear from me again, and you'll never have to worry about any of this again. So how do I make a complex sentence? As mentioned before, complex sentences have a main or an independent clause and a dependent clause or clauses. I could make a whole course on how to write complex sentences. It is a huge topic. So when I went to research this topic, I realized just how massive it is. But then I realized that A, you don't have the time to look at everything. And more importantly, B, you don't need everything. Do you need to know everything about complex sentences? Do you need to know every single conjunction? Do you need to know every single rule? No, you are not, you're not doing a grammar test. You're doing the IELTS writing or the IELTS speaking test. Let's look at the essentials. So I asked myself, how can I make this as simple as possible for you? So it took me a long time, but I figured out, what are the absolute essentials, the absolute fundamentals that we need to work on. So that's what we're going to work on. So simplifying the complex. This is what I'm good at. This is what I'm known for. And what I've done is applied my technique of simplifying the complex to complex sentences. Another way to think about this is that complex sentences have multiple ideas in them. Alright, so think about the main clause or the independent clause as one idea, and then the other clause, the dependent clause, as having another idea. And that makes it just simpler and easier to understand. If we get very technical and look at all the terminology and learn all the rules, we will be here for the next year. Let's take our ideas and simply put them together. Think of your paragraph as pieces of wood. Each piece of wood is going to help you build your paragraph, just in the same way that if you were building a fence or you were building a cabin. How will you join them together? So you have your pieces of wood. Imagine you're building a fence. How are you going to join those pieces of wood? Each piece of wood is an idea. Your fence, think of it as a whole paragraph or a whole essay. What are you going to need to join them together? Conjunctions. So think about conjunctions as a nail that you hammer into a piece of wood to join pieces of woods together. Pieces of woods. There's a plural noun mistake for you, just showing that everybody makes mistakes. Pieces of wood. So each piece of wood is an idea. The whole fence is a paragraph or an essay, and the conjunctions are the nails that you're going to use to join the pieces of wood together. So think of it about this course or yourself as the hammer, hammering together all of those ideas using the nails, and the nails are conjunctions. So what are conjunctions? Simply put, they're words that connect ideas together. Take your ideas, put them together using conjunctions. So why is online shopping so popular? So let's look at an example. So it is cheap. Online shops have lower costs. They pass savings to customers. Customers save money. So 4 ideas, 4 simple ideas. And we need to think of each of these as a piece of wood. We need to put these 4 ideas together in 1 or 2 sentences. Saving money means they can spend money on other things. All right, so 5 ideas. Okay, so what I've done is I've taken those 5 ideas and I put them into simple sentences. So online shopping is popular because it is cheap. Online shops have lower costs. They pass savings to customers. Customers save money. Saving money means they can spend money on other things. So all accurate, but we need to make this a little bit more complex. So if all you did in the test was write very simple sentences like these ones, the examiner is going to look at it and say, your grammar is pretty good, it's very, very accurate, but in order to be getting a 7 or above, I'd like you to make your sentences a little bit more complex. That's what the examiner would be thinking. So here's what we've done. Online shopping is popular because it is cheap. Online shops have much lower costs, which means these companies can pass the savings to the customers so that the customers save money and they can spend it on other things. So the words in green here are conjunctions. All right. So you're probably looking at this paragraph and thinking, this is not very complex. Why is he teaching us this? These are complex sentences. All right. So we have 2 complex sentences. Online shopping is popular because it is cheap. So we have the dependent or the independent clause and the dependent clause. Online shops have much lower cost. Conjunction, which means these companies can pass the savings to the customers so that we're showing a result that the customers save money, and addition, they can spend it on other things. So think of these 4 green bits here as the nails and the black bits as pieces of wood, and we have constructed a nice paragraph here. Obviously our paragraph, task 2 paragraphs, would be longer than this, but it's just for demonstration purposes only. So let's look at some common conjunctions. So on the left hand column here we have the type. So we have time, place, reason, contrast, condition, purpose, result. So to show time we can since, when, while, place, in the same place as, where, wherever, reason, as, because, that, contrast, although, despite the fact that, whereas, condition, given that, if, unless, purpose, in order that, so that, in order to, and result, so that, as a result. Is this an exhaustive list? Is this every single conjunction in the world? No. What I have done for you is I have looked at the most common types of conjunctions used, and I've looked at the most common conjunctions found in sample essays. But there's others that you could use. Do not think that you can't use other conjunctions, but these are just some common ones. So let's look at some example sentences. She celebrated as soon as she saw her Ielts result. Place, she went into the room where the examiner was waiting for her. You should learn grammar because it's important. She got a high IELTS score, although she didn't study. I won't go out later if I'm tired. The students studied hard so that they would get a high score. He studied very hard, so he got a high score. So these are just some example sentences, and the bits in red are the conjunctions, showing you how I've made very simple ideas and made complex sentences with them. And you're probably looking at these going, oh, these are complex sentences? Why was I writing very, very long, complicated things? Hopefully the penny is dropping. Hope the penny is dropping is an idiom. You can look that one up. Things are starting to click into place, and you realize that complex sentences are not very complex and they're easy to make. So here's a sample answer. So here's a sample paragraph from a task 2 sample essay. Also, just going back, some of this kind of stuff, they might be going over your head a little bit, and there's a lot of information. Feel free to pause the video and think about these, or write them down in your notebook. You should be making notes anyway, or think about these sentences, and then things will become much easier. There's a lot of information to be taking in. So the worst thing you can do, and a lot of you do this, is just like, oh my god, I don't understand anything, it's all too much. Just slow down, take your time, and you'll be okay. So let's look at this sample answer. So what I've done is I put the conjunctions in, and then the type of conjunction that it is, making complex sentences here. So there are many ways in which people put their health at risk because they are afraid of altering their lifestyle. So we're showing the reason here, and we're using because as a conjunction. Some people eat the same unhealthy diet every day so that they are not used to other healthier alternatives, resulting in them sticking to the same processed fatty foods. For example, many people living in big cities eat fast food regularly because they only have access to fast food restaurants where they can only purchase junk food. Although many people are aware of the consequences, obesity-related diseases like stroke and diabetes are still the major causes of death in developed countries. Now, again, you could look at this and say, well, there's no really long sentences. And most sentences are pretty short. Complex doesn't mean long. And you could look at this and go, it's pretty straightforward. I can understand everything. Complex doesn't mean complicated. So what the purpose of this is to just show you how simple it is to make complex sentences using conjunctions. Instead of thinking about all the complicated terminology, just think, okay, I've got this idea. I want to express this idea. How can I do that simply? Put in your conjunction and you should be fine. The most important thing is not to think, how can I make lots of complex sentences? So when you are writing, if you go into the writing test with a grammar first attitude, by grammar first attitude I mean all you're thinking about is grammar. It's the same as having a vocabulary first attitude. You will fail because you're only thinking about that. Think first of how can I clearly answer the question, and then think about grammar second. If you thought, how can I just clearly answer the question, and you write a paragraph, you'll be amazed at how many complex sentences you already have, and then you don't have to worry about it so much. However, many of you just need help making sure that these complex sentences are accurate. So are you already making complex sentences? Go and look at your writing samples. Go and look at, especially if I've given you a correction before, look at some of your accurate sentences, or sentences that were 90% accurate. Look for ideas, look for dependent clauses, look for independent clauses, look for conjunctions especially, and you will be amazed at how many complex sentences you are already making. There's a very high likelihood that you are already producing accurate, complex sentences. Don't try and push it too far, alright? If you learn anything from this, is the bar is much lower than you think. So what have we learned in this lesson? The most important thing is that you're aware of what simple and complex actually means. It is more important to get simple sentences correct than it is to try and write lots of long sentences. And try and think about sentences with more than one clause while you're doing the rest of this course. They will become much easier to produce. Alright, so we're going to be looking at lots of different things in this course. And the reason why I started off with simple and complex sentences is that you will be seeing lots more complex sentences as we go through this course and as we look at many, many different things. So it's just something to be aware of and think about while you are going through the course. So the next lesson, we're going to look at articles. Please do the practice activities at the end of this lesson, and that will help consolidate your learning and help you out. So next lesson, we're going to look at articles. Hope that you find this lesson useful, you find it enjoyable. Obviously, you do not have to understand absolutely everything first time. Some of you will maybe go through the course and watch each module one time and then maybe go through some things again. Some of you will watch each module 2 times. Do whatever you think suits you. And the most important thing you do is just don't turn off the video and forget about it and not do anything about it. And think about what you need to do in order to fully understand this. And I would definitely urge you to go and look at your writing and think about how you are or are not making accurate complex sentences already. Thank you very much, guys. See you again in the next module.